Hi, my name is Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I like to discuss the latest moves to put pressure on Keir Starmer to officially adopt moves for proportional representation as official Labour Party policy later this year. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, throughout my politically aware life, I have been a Labour Party supporter. Haven't always been a member, wasn't a member during Tony Blair's time, but I was a supporter. It didn't matter who was leader. As far as I was concerned, I always saw Labour government as the best option of those available. Sure, it doesn't necessarily mean it exactly fitted exactly what I wanted, but it was always the best available. And I always say in politics and democracy isn't about what you want, it's about what you least oppose. However, my political aims have now subtly shifted. I still want a Labour government, but not for quite the same reasons as before. Not that I've changed my mind on the reasons. They're still in place, but they are no longer the most important reasons. The most important political problem we have right now is that we have a populist government that has taken control of the reins of power. And we know from repeated lessons from history where this ends up if it is not dealt with. To this end, it's not that I don't care about the policies that prompted me to support Labour in the past, it's that they now pale into insignificance compared to removing what the Conservative Party has become. And this is crucial, never letting them back in again. Now, in reality, there is no way to actually prevent a populist government from coming to power in any country with any system. Populism is a powerful political tool, very difficult to counter. It's also at its most powerful at times of national decline. Again, we know this from history. And here, unlike many of the most famous populists in history, the Conservatives are not reliant upon mere circumstance, though they have taken advantage of unexpected events like the pandemic when they've turned up. Brexit is a huge factor in our impending national decline, and one that they deliberately used as the vehicle for amplifying the appeal of their populist message. I want them gone. I want their poison gone, and the best way to do this is with proportional representation. Without it, all of the policies are worthless. People banging on about this policy, but this policy, we should have this policy. All of them are worthless. Every single one. Some in Labour are not happy that Starmer is conducting a policy review that will result in a rewriting of Corbyn's 2019 manifesto. Now, on one level, neither am I necessarily, but those policies are all, every single one of them, completely worthless without first past the post. Even if Labour won a clear majority, which is mathematically impossible for 2024, but even if they did, let us imagine, they would get to work and then what? Eventually they would lose. They'd lose power. The Conservatives would come back in. It wouldn't be anyone else. There wouldn't be the emergence of anyone else. Conservative Party aren't going away with the current political system. They'd be back and they would destroy it all. It takes years to build up the state. No time at all to tear it down. So before I prioritise any domestic or international policies again, it's necessary to make sure we have a system that makes it impossible for a destructive government to ever again take 100% of the power with less than 50% of the popular vote. About a quarter of the population eligible to vote voted for the Conservatives in 2019. A quarter, just over. That means about 3/4 did not support them. Now, some didn't support anyone because they didn't go and vote. More voted for those who opposed them. Only proportional representation can stop a situation where someone like the Conservatives, extremists, can come to power like that. Yes, it can't actually stop a very successful populist campaign, because if it can actually persuade 50% of voters to back them, sure, it still then gets 100% of the power. No way of stopping that. But it's hard to see how such an extreme government could ever achieve a majority share of the votes. So I would abandon all of the policies to throw our weight behind proportional representation. It's impossible to transform Britain for the better with any noble policy if you can only ever guarantee a few years before the ogres come back to stamp it all back into the dirt. Now, in the past, it would have been absolutely unthinkable that Labour would back such a move in a determined way. I'd said myself as recently as last year that Labour could get behind it, but they won't get behind it early because there's too much opposition within the party. I mean, Blair sort of got behind it, but he didn't throw his full weight behind it, so it failed to the ruin of us all. And then there's a real hunger now, and this has been growing over the last year. You know, I see increasing support from within Labour to push for this, and crucially, and this is what switches it, no serious opposition to it. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't those who are completely... There are those who are not sold on the idea, but opposition now is muted. Whenever I see this brought up in a Labour forum, you don't really see a dog pile in the way... There's nothing you can say in the Labour Party forum that won't have a load of people piling onto it, one way or the other. This is the one thing where actually you don't get that. It's like the one unifying thing. And the problem for Labour used to be this. So there are parts of the country that were strong Labour areas. Those areas would always vote Labour, the so-called Red Wall. To get elected, you didn't need to persuade thousands of people to vote for you. They will vote for whichever monkey you stick a red rosette on. You only had to persuade about half a dozen people. Get the blessing of the local party executive and the seat was yours. And this is not good for democracy either. It doesn't matter who the party is. If the local executive doesn't feel the need to get the best candidate, there runs the risk of them getting the most compliant stooge. But the red wall is crumbling, and it isn't Starmer or even Corbyn that caused this directly, though 2019 was an inexcusable bloodbath. Voting behaviours have been shifting for a while. You know, it's not like Labour were gaining and then it crashed down with Corbyn. It was sort of going in a particular direction. You know, they've been changing for a while. Labour have been losing support among some demographics, but they've been picking it up in others. The recent elections were not great press for Labour, but they did increase their vote share compared to 2019. And while the Conservatives made another foray into what used to be Labour territory, what was much less reported is Labour also broke into theirs. For example, they nixed David Cameron's old council, proper Tory heartland. But this isn't a tale of winning the next election with different voters. A recent poll showed that there is strong support for proportional representation in the country. And then I was thinking, well, actually, this is pretty good because there isn't even a conversation in the country about it. No one's really pushing it. You know, with a determined campaign for it, that support would increase further. Even a large number of Conservative supporters seem to be in favour. And it's frustrating to people when their vote doesn't count. And people who argue against PR will say things like, well, it means you won't always have a local MP. In a way, yeah, okay. So if you vote on a regional basis, and there are different forms of PR, but if you vote on a regional basis, sure, you might actually end up with no MPs in your town. But what people don't consider is that most people don't have a local MP right now. My local MP is a Conservative, and he's a pretty obstinate one at that. So at least where I lived before I moved last year, they'd gained a Tory MP, but she listened and responded. Okay, she was still a Tory, she's still going to back Tory policies, but she did at least listen to you, she wasn't patronising. The one I have now is, so I don't have an MP. If I need to raise an issue, he will ignore it because he's only interested in pushing the Tory agenda. I do not have a local MP. And there will be Conservative supporters in Labour areas who will feel the same. And Green supporters everywhere except Brighton, I suppose. But with PR, you will likely have an MP in your region that you can go to. Every region would definitely get at least one Labour MP and at least one Conservative MP. Decent chance of a Liberal Democrat MP, and a lot of regions would even get a Green MP as well. So you'd be, if you support one of the major parties, you'd be all but guaranteed to be able to contact someone who would be sympathetic to your issue. You would be able to contact whichever MP was more likely to be sympathetic to your issue. That's better representation than we have now. Proportional representation, far from making it harder to get a local MP, basically guarantees you'll get someone. And unlike last year, The Labour Party conference this year will be a physical meeting. It will be Keir Starmer's first real conference. It was virtual last year. It will need to be good. Look, there's a lot of pressure on him right now. And there are those who are, and this is what I find particularly annoying, I've said it before, there are those inside Labour who are relishing Labour losses in by-elections, local elections. They're looking forward to it. Such is the poison in their hearts. So Starmer needs to formulate some campaign policies this September. He's got to be able to announce something. He has to put a stamp on his Labour Party with some values. What does it stand for? There will be a lot of policies for the manifesto when the time comes. But which ones will go on the side of the bus? Now, I talked recently about how they would need to be both popular and something the Conservatives would never adopt themselves. We aren't going to win by promising to do what the Tories also promise, but in a slightly more credible way. We are not going to win by saying we're a less crap version of the Tories. And there are several things the party should do. It should campaign to rejoin the customs union single market. It should campaign for fuller devolution. But one thing that it can campaign for, which will mark them out from the Conservatives, and for which it seems to me now, looking at Labour Party forum discussions, there will not be an internal party faction battle, is proportional representation. Not some weak-arse hybrid as exists in our devolved administrations either. That would be better, but it's not good enough. Every MP elected by PR. And yes, there are different forms of this. And yes, they'd have to carry out a review into which form they would support. All the more reason to start it earlier. All the more reason to get the ball rolling nice and early so that by the time you get to the general election, it isn't a vague, proportional representation. Yeah, but what form? Because people opposed to it will pin them down on the details. Get the details sorted, start it nice and early. All the more reason to announce the policy this year for the party conference. Stick it on the side of the bus, get the debate started. Scare the crap out of the Conservatives, get some actual unity going on in the Labour Party, something that everyone could get behind. And even if, like as I said, not necessarily everyone will get behind it, but the ones who wouldn't are at least not vocally opposed to it now. And give our country some hope again. And finally, another benefit of such a policy is that it would have strong cross-party support, making the case for a progressive alliance that Labour are currently bafflingly turning down, because that is the thing that is absolutely needed in order to be able to actually implement any policies at all. And support for this is growing. I've never seen support like it within Labour. We have got support for both proportional representation and a progressive alliance. There is more vocal opposition to the progressive alliance, I have to say. So proportional representation first, perhaps. But the support has always been there outside of it. It's always internal Labour battles that cause the problem. It's always internal Labour battles that cause every problem, including the Conservatives. But I think there will be a real push for this to happen. It's something that needs a good run-up. So this year's conference would be the ideal time for it, which is at the end of September. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.